Hi guys, and welcome to the Glam Reaper Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Muldowney, aka the Glam Reaper herself. Today on the show we have a subject that is near and dear to my heart, which is the environment. And we are talking about one of the latest forms of body disposition. We are talking to Ed about fireless cremation. Tell me a little bit about you, Ed. Lovely to have you here. Welcome. And tell us, why are you here?
Jennifer, I'm in the death care business. Kind of landed here. It's my death calling at this point. Um, my
Lovely.
birthday's this week. I'll be 61. But years ago,
Happy birthday in advance.
Thank you. So I started starting businesses back when I was in high school, but I started a company in college that went public. So I've been involved in reducing emissions through the air, NOx and SOx from major power plants. That company's still traded on NASDAQ, Fuel Tech, and Clean Diesel Technology Inc. I also built the largest green building here in Colorado. So it's a double LEED platinum. So I've been involved in reducing energy use and trying to clean up the environment, making people healthy for decades. And I read about resumation 10 years ago and tried to get the rights from Sandy Sullivan in the UK. And I was negotiating with him, but he gave the rights, as we all know, to Matthews Industries for the US. So he gave it to a company that's got 5,000 crematories around the world. And they had a very expensive system. And I called them and wanted to work with them, but they told me to pound sand. So I did a patent search. So I've taken patent law too. And I went and found someone who had worked at WR Squared, which ironically is also where Sandy Sullivan worked. So alkaline hydrolysis has its basis with these two professors in upstate New York. So that's kind of where it all originated. They were trying to get rid of some wascally wabbits that had been infected with radiation. And they used to have to package them up in stainless steel barrels and ship them off to Nevada. And they figured out they could just flush them down the drain if they used alkaline hydrolysis. And that's the origin of, where all this came from.
Okay, so just to pause you right there, for anybody that doesn't know, resumation, alkaline hydrolysis, water cremation, biocremation, there's a lot of terms that float around to do with this specific thing. And
Right.
essentially what it is disposition of a human body or any body, as you discussed about rabbits.
Right.
So it's getting rid, disposition of a body using liquid effectively. That's kind of it in a
We use,
nutshell, right?
you use chemicals. So you use
Yeah,
alkali. It's a
yeah,
pH of 14.
yeah.
Um, we have our own patent pending on a new chemical process, but we still use alkali, but we use an accelerant. So rather than taking 18 hours at low temperature, we only take about 2 hours. And then we also have a process where we bring the pH down from typically 10.2 is where they end up with resumation, down to neutral, which is 7. So you're actually useful for the earth. So we actually do, fireless burials. We give back 100% of the body, not just the bones. So you also get all the essence of the person too.
Right. So again, just for anybody out there, when regular cremation is what people mostly know about. By the time this goes to air, maybe more people will know about resumation and alkaline hydrolysis and all the other. But right now it's burial or cremation. Like when you go into a funeral home, it's typically burial or cremation. There are states that have opened up to water cremation or resumation or the other. But effectively it's kind of one of two options at the moment, right? And cremation, typically what you get back is just ground down bone. Now, there are people out there who have questions about whether the casket gets burned, whether it's resold, and whether when they get it back, is it their loved one with a casket. Ed is Fireless Cremation. So Ed is effectively, by being rebuffed by sort of Matthews and Sandy, effectively, you've just said, okay, stick a finger up, I'll go and do my own thing. And so you've come up with your own, what you consider better to resomation and alkaline hydrolysis and this kind of thing. So,
Sure.
what is your, when you say you're better for the earth, um, talk to us about the difference between that and cremation. Let's forget about resomation for uno momento, just
Sure.
because I know a lot of people are still not familiar with it, and it's not even legal in a whole lot of states. So, talk about it in terms of what people know now. So, because you call it fireless cremation, so that's what people know right now is fired cremation,
Right.
right?
So when you burn a body, you use petrochemicals. So typically it takes about 3 million BTUs, which is equivalent energy in 26 gallons of gasoline, to burn a body. So the body is a carbon-based life form, and to burn it, all the water and everything has to be evaporated, and it takes hours to reduce a body and spew out of a smokestack about 50% of someone's bones. And these small particulates go out the smokestack, which is the sixth leading cause of death around the world. So we've got a process where we're, doing a final disposition of the dead and releasing toxins, mercury, furan. So you talked about, do they burn the casket? They don't like burning metal caskets, but I'll tell you, when the bodies come in, they've got all kind of mercury in their teeth, typically from amalgams. A lot of times there'll be plastic in with the body, whether they have polyester clothes on, uh, and it's just a mess what comes out the smokestack. It's actually 50 times the safe limit of mercury comes out of an average smokestack, and no one does anything about it because the EPA doesn't consider humans waste. So they actually have these small afterburners on the top of crematories that break the particles that are coming out, so you don't see the flesh coming out and the bones coming out. It's really small. They're PM 2.5s, which means they get into your body, they can go through your lungs and get into your blood and go into your brain. And that's where, this neurotoxin, of things like mercury is very harmful. And what people don't know is when you get back the bones, you talked about how they rake them out, they're on fire. It takes about 2 hours for them to cool. Then they got to remove all the implants that they can find, metal and screws, because they want to ruin what they call kind of a cremulator, something that actually grinds up bones. So typically when they rake them out, you get, by law, you have to just get the preponderance of bones out. And that oven is 1600 to 1900 degrees. And typically, if you're a funeral home, you've got another body you want to put in there, or if you're a trade work crematory. And they only re-brick these things every 2,000 bodies. So if you think about it, when you get your urn back, it's full of commingled cremains. So there's other people's bones in there with whoever else was cremated before you. Um, so that's just the way it works. So it's just not a very good process for the earth. And it releases, I mean, there's different studies. I think the best I've seen is 540 pounds of carbon dioxide per cremation. Where ours, we use electric heat and we use about 40 kilowatts, which is equivalent of about 36 pounds of CO2 emitted to heat our vessel. So we use way less than even about 5% of what crematories do to burn a body.
So, in terms of energy you're saving on the input, what about the output? Does your unit have any output? Does it have any chimney stack? What's the MO on that? Does it have any output, anything at all?
It's there's water vapors, so we do heat the vessel to about 190 degrees. There is some low VOCs that come out, volatile organic compounds, um, and it's minimal. We don't burn any of the clothing, and we don't even burn a viscera bag. We actually take the viscera bag out. So that's what, when they use an autopsy, you end up with a big plastic bag in your gut full of your viscerals. And typically that's burned. And so anytime you burn plastic, as you know, you get furans and dioxins going up into the air, which means everybody in that radius of that crematory is breathing in that that was just burned. I mean, it's pretty bad. So, and then the other difference is in our vessel, as opposed to, let's say, resomations or bioresponse, all of those, when you're done with alkaline hydrolysis, typically anywhere from a third, and we've had 3 times as much sandy bones, tiny bones that are the size of salt that would typically just go down the drain. So we're giving back more of the person 100% of their bone material back to the family. So typically people need two urns. I mean, it's a massive amount of bones you get back, and it just surprises people. And they're white and they're beautiful, and they don't contain any. They're not oily and charred like they would be.
And so how does that work? How do you give people twice as much back versus the crematorium? Is that because half of them have gone up in smoke? Is that
Oh yeah,
or
the bones are just on fire. I mean, even when they rake them out, they're in a stainless steel container, and like I said, it takes about 2 hours for them to stop burning once they even rake them out. But during that process, you want sterile bones, and so to get into the marrow and the inside of the bones, you pretty much have to cook them till they're cracked and they're broken apart. Think about leaving a chicken thigh on the or chicken leg on the grill until there's nothing left. It just kind of breaks apart and there's no flesh or anything. That's what happens in a crematory. It's just something's left inside an oven until there's nothing left really. And a lot of the bone goes up in the air.
yeah, and that's we are talking very basic here, and obviously, this will be a difficult episode for anybody who has lost somebody and maybe gotten them cremated and everything like that.
Oh, it's
And
terrible for people. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
there's no funeral director they don't typically tell you what happens, right? So,
no. And like there's two sides to that. There's one where should we be completely transparent in all and in everything? Honestly, as somebody who deals with grieving people on a daily basis, there are people who are prepared for that and people who want that transparency, and there are people that absolutely do not. It's a very difficult conversation to broach with people. Do you know what really happens inside a cremulator? And there is a sort of naivete attached, I think, to Joe Public in terms of what happens with burial and cremation. Even people that are talking about eco burials and things like that, there's a lot that people don't know. The carcinogenic drugs that we pump into our bodies towards the end of our lives, all that has to go up somewhere, whether it's back into the ground if you've gone for burial, or whether it's up as chimney stack. So you call yourself Fireless Cremation, and yet you've referred to burning quite a lot in your description of what happens. So talk to me a bit about that.
you mean in our process or
Yeah, in your process.
well, I mean, it's a dissolution as opposed to a burning. So a fireless, we're not using petrochemicals. We're using chemicals which actually return nutrients to the earth. So we talked about already how you get twice as much bone matter back. But you also get all the essence. So when you look at a person, they're not just a skeleton inside, which is maybe 8 to 12% of their total body mass, but there's all the rest of them. And what we do is, for about every 100 pounds, we only use 12 gallons of water, where someone like Resumation or Bioresponse, their processes typically take about 300 gallons. So one of the reasons people don't really like other alkaline hydrolysis, everything goes down the sewer, right at the end.
Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to flush Granny down the toilet.
No.
That's not to say I'm against reservation, but that's the.
Well, I mean, I think it's better than petrochemical cremation, but it'd be really nice if you could take Granny, not have to breathe her because someone burned her, and not have to put her down the sewer, which people don't see as dignified. So I sold the very first system to a funeral director 10 years ago. I had a company called Cycled Life, but I've got a new process now. But what happens is all that material in your body, that all this beautiful, rich, nutrient, organic material is returned to the earth. So in our process, nothing goes down the sewer. In fact, most people take 25 gallons of the essence, twice as much bones back, and bury it. They take it up to the mountains, they put it in their backyard, and that way they don't need a casket and they don't need a cemetery to do a burial. So we actually provide people a burial, and if they don't want that essence, which is really a plant biostimulant, it's a fertilizer, because the chemicals we use actually add nutrients in your body. We make you better off dead than you were alive for the earth, right? So.
Wow, I mean that's very impressive. Now, when you keep referring to essence, is that liquid form? Is that powder form?
It's liquid.
Okay, so when somebody gets their loved one back, if I get Granny back, for example, I'm going to get a Sounds right. I'm going to get an urn of her ash, and if you like, an urn of her liquid.
Now you'll get what we call plaskets instead of caskets. So they're 5 gallon plastic jugs. They're clear. Currently, they're white, and they have a handle. And so typically, a 150-pound person, you'd get about 25 gallons of her essence back. So it'd be a liquid form. You can pour it right on the ground. You can dig a hole and pour it in and then put the dirt back on. But the idea is it actually adds nutrients to the top layer of the soil. Where in a burial, someone's 4 feet under, even a green burial, you got to bury them deep enough that the scavengers won't come dig them out, right? So you got to be at least 4 feet under the ground. So with ours, you want to add nutrients to the topsoil so you help the living. So you make plants and trees and everything more vital.
So if I take if I take Granny's essence and her remains, and I get a pot and I put a rose bush seed into the pot, does Granny absorb everything and turn into a rose bush, or does she need other soil, or what's the? Because that's the $1 million question on social media. Can I become a tree or can I become a rose bush?
Oh,
So,
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you do get absorbed. Your nutrients do get absorbed by whatever soil you've been putting into, and whatever is growing on that, your essence goes into it. So, yes, technically you become part of your essence becomes part of a tree. Is it you? There's no DNA left. So, I mean, what really defines a human? Really, when
mm,
you're done, you are chemicals, your nutrients for the earth, your potassium, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, right? Your water, and all that is returned to the earth. And that's how we used to be before they started burying people. Once there were enough people on the planet that someone died and you could just not avoid them for a while, you had to put them somewhere, right? They start to stink. They bring in scavengers. Um, and so this is a great way to go back to the earth and actually be regenerative to the earth rather than
right.
taking up a plot of land forever, and have all the resources to maintain that land. I mean, I figure if everyone on the earth died today, there'd be another 4% of the inhabitable world would be taken by graves if everyone were buried. Got a little 3 by 8 plot.
Yeah, no, I mean, burial is definitely not sustainable in its current format for sure. It's just not. I mean, Asia, for example, is what 99.9% cremation rate because
There's no
there's just
land,
no there's just no space for them. It's just you just can't go anywhere. The rest of
right?
us will soon catch up. It's a fact. Um, Now tell me this. In terms of legality, you're obviously based in Denver, in Colorado, or it's Colorado. I assumed Denver. Sorry, maybe I made that
I
up. Did
am
I?
in Denver. Yes.
You are in Denver. I love Denver. Maybe that's why I made it up. Anytime you want me to come visit Ed, I'm ready.
Great.
So tell us this. Are you legal in all the states in the world, countries in the world? Tell us about the legality of this. If we've got a funeral director who's like, this is for me, I want to talk to Ed. What's the crack with that?
We fit in with alkaline hydrolysis. So I continue to work on laws around the country and around the world. But I mean, wherever alkaline hydrolysis is legal currently, this is legal.
Okay, tell me how does that work for you? Because isn't alkaline hydrolysis very different to what you're doing?
No, I mean, technically, we're still, when they talk about alkaline hydrolysis, typically the laws are written, and I've written some of the laws that are out there. Typically, it refers to a chemical process.
Okay.
Or there's a few states where they actually refer to it as alkaline hydrolysis. And what that means is you just got to use either potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide and water to break the body down. Now,
And you do that anyway.
yeah, now there's some people that are out there that are trying to make it high pressure, saying only high pressure destroys the prions. So these are DNA strands or protein strands that typically live in the brain, things like mad cow, chronic wasting disease, avian bear, uh, bird flu, that kind of stuff that is really hazardous and kills people. A lot of they want to make sure that's destroyed. And there's been some recent studies. Ontario just made it legal to use a low temp because there's all these studies now that show that it destroys that. But there's these guys who are trying to make high pressure the only way to go, and the high pressure machines, like, they can cost 240,000 or more, right? Just for the machine. And the problem is they can explode. There's one that exploded recently up in Canada where the lid came off, the door came off, and it went through the building, and the body went out in the street. It was a bioresponse system. Oh yeah, the high pressure boiler is what they are. Ours is low temp, so ours is very safe and it destroys everything. So I would never get a high temp system. Just one for the money. Two, it takes a lot longer than our process. So our process takes about 2 hours. Even those systems are taking 4 to 6 hours. So
So again, just to break it down for everyone, so the high pressure, so and this is what I, even as an industry professional, found very very frustrating and confusing about alkaline hydrolysis, reservation slash water cremation slash all the different terms,
oh,
is there's so many different brand variations of it, and there's so many different variations of it. So when you're talking about high pressure, you're still talking about reservation, but a high pressure version of it.
well,
No.
there's Preservation and Bioresponse Solution is the one. Their system's the one that exploded up in Canada.
Right, but okay, because this is where it's frustrating, and for a non-scientist person, it's frustrating because there's burial or there's cremation.
True.
This other option that has uses chemicals, there just seems to be so many different variants to it.
No, it's pretty
So
simple. They all came from WR squared, which was waste by waste reduction, right? These two professors in upstate New York. They
yeah,
were medical professors with the radiated rabbits. So Joe Wilson, who's with Bioresponse, and Sandy Sullivan both were involved with WR squared. They use basically the same chemical process. They have different machines. They use different ways of heating it, of stirring it. The machines look different. They have different price points, but it's the same chemical process:
right,
water and sodium or potassium. So what we did is when I sold that first system, we knew there were problems with it. You know, sometimes it would take 16, 18 hours at low temp. And the way that's set up is the skull wasn't getting done. So you had typically, a brain left in the cranium, right? Because all the bones would get in the bottom of the basket. They're still having problems with that today. So, I question whether the effluent is even sterile at that point, if you still have tissue left. Ours looks more like a bathtub, and the body's in there and it rocks back and forth. And so at the end, there's no basket that comes out that drips everywhere, right? And our process takes 2 hours, not 18 hours at low temp. So we have a patent pending on the accelerant for it, and that
right,
actually makes it work. And then we
okay.
bring the pH down. So that's very different too. I'll never put anybody's body down the sewer or make other
Well,
people breathe it.
yeah, well, and see, this is where I think there is going to be some confusion with it, in terms of if I was going into a funeral home and I don't know anything about this. Like this is one of the largest problems I think the funeral industry has is Joe Public is uneducated in this and doesn't want to be educated necessarily in all the stuff we talk about. And so they walk in and they have this third option, and they just say, "Oh, that's that. Yeah, I'll do that." Now, I am in the funeral home and I've chosen this third option. It could be yours, it could be Sandy's, it could be I won't know. I don't know, or I
Sure.
could be thinking I'm choosing yours, but it could be Sandy's or the other guy. Like
Well,
that's
you're
I
doing,
think
you're
where
doing
the
people
flight.
a favor, letting them know that, there is different ways you can go down with alkaline hydrolysis. You can go down the sewer, you can go back to the earth. We're the
Yeah,
only ones that currently return the body to the earth. No one else. I know that there's some veterinarians and some other people that have had um, put it back on the earth, but they're putting it back with all the fats and all the salts. So fats and salts aren't good for the earth. Our process at the end, we end up also with something called crystalline, which is these beautiful crystals, in their fats and salts. So that's why the essence, when you pour it out, is just liquid. Otherwise, you'd have these formations of fat and salts, which actually kill plants, right? So you
right.
don't want that.
And those crystals, are they something the family can keep? Or are they something
I give
for?
it back if they want it. I tell them about it. If they don't want it, we're trying to figure out right now. I think it's got a very high fat content, right? So we're thinking it might be useful as a biodiesel if people don't
Okay.
want it. But there was a family about 300 yards from where our facility is that actually did a burial. So they took all the crystalline. and they buried it in the ground along with all the essence and the bones of the wife and the mother. It was a beautiful way to go. I mean, they
Yeah.
literally did a burial. The difference between the price point to be able to be buried environmentally through our process is a quarter of the cost. Our process, we're charging $2,495 US. So we've been processing bodies or doing fireless cremation since August of 2019, right?
So you're a year in business of actually selling these units.
Well, we were just doing, we were perfecting the process. We're running our original system, but now we're selling systems. So we're manufacturing systems here in Colorado and selling them around the world.
Okay, great. And is there any states or countries where there is a unit that you can?
We just started manufacturing the new one. So the one that we have is the very first one of this version.
Got it.
Um, the next ones will come out. There's 5 of them being developed, and they'll be ready in 12 weeks from today.
Okay, and are they going anywhere?
We know where they're going. Some of them.
Okay.
Some are still available. So if anybody wants one,
Okay. I was about to say, I was like, are you going to give us an exclusive there in 5 weeks where they're going? People can be lined up. Maybe I'll release the podcast bang just when they're about to go out.
I don't think anyone's going to die just to go in these. Be the first in.
You don't know.
I'll line up like an Apple store for the new version.
Listen, people go for celebrity for lots of different reasons. So
if you want to jump in the system, you can. Sure.
Yeah, you just don't know. So okay, so the way you're doing it is manufacturing them and then selling them. Is it to crematoriums? Is it to funeral directors? Is this something that you can, like, because it's got no output as in a chimney stack, could you put one of these units on a penthouse building, say in Trump Towers in New York City?
I don't think I'd want to deal with the security risk at Trump.
Not right now, for sure.
No, these need to be. Technically, they could go in a retail location. I wouldn't want to put them. There's zoning that dictates where these go. So by law, they're considered crematories, right?
Okay.
Even though they don't have admissions, no one's really said, okay, we're going to make a special zoning for alkaline hydrolysis. And the reason is there's chemicals involved. So the potassium hydroxide is a pH of 14. You wouldn't really want a chemical spill on the top floor of Trump Towers, right?
No, you definitely wouldn't. Not a chemical spill of the deceased, for sure.
Bodies coming in and out, and so and you got people crying and stuff. So yeah, I don't think you'll see one at Trump Towers anytime soon.
Okay. So
maybe the White House. One in the White House.
It's typically it is typically you're selling to industry folk. You're selling to crematoriums, funeral directors.
Well, I'd love also this. Yeah, it's mostly people that do trade work. Are typically people who buy these, and then the funeral homes buy them. But then also there's people like myself that didn't have a funeral home before I got into this. Just read about it, thought about the environmental impact, and decided to do something good for the world that'll do it. So I really think kind of like cremation grew out of a couple of used car salesmen out of California, started the Neptune Society. And really started, pushing the funeral homes. I think there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to set these up in cities and compete with the funeral homes too. So
wow, them's fighting words from the funeral community, Ed. We might have to put that in the.
Fighting,
we might have to put that in the bloopers.
What happens, but I mean, embalming. I wouldn't work with any funeral homes here in Denver that did embalming, but that's not because of the process. It's just because I think embalming is terrible for the environment. So you got to draw a line in the sand somewhere and say, what are you? Are you on the side of your survivors, or are you just doing something that's expedient? Because everyone else is getting cremated, or do you really look at it? And I think this kind of education you're putting on might make people think about what is their impact on their survivors. And no one really wants to harm. Granny doesn't want to die and harm you, right?
No.
I don't know your granny, but
mine are all gone, unfortunately.
Right. So they
buried.
Sorry.
In classic Ireland style, buried as well. Cremation wouldn't have even been. God Lord, don't even consider cremation. So this would have definitely not wouldn't have
Well, this
worked.
would have been better than cremation for them because they could have been buried, but they could have been buried in a way where they could have nourished the beautiful flesh.
No, Ed, it's in Ireland. It's a religious thing. I mean, cremation itself only became something, an option in Ireland, like, God, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, 30 years ago. I keep saying 20 years ago, but 10 years I was saying that. So now it's 30. I mean, you've got the whole Catholic thing. I mean, I have a cremation jewelry line. That's something that I started 10 years ago, and even that is gets the odd sort of, it's disgraceful what you're doing, because there are some steadfast Catholics who believe that the body should remain intact entirely, so
Well,
cremation. But it's, listen, that's a whole other podcast, because the fact that cremation is now allowed all of a sudden and now promoted because we're running out of body space and because the church can make money from it. Yeah.
well,
So
yeah.
yeah. Fast forward another 20 years and there'll be all sorts of options.
Well, there's a lot of people that don't want to burn twice, so
Yeah, that's true.
for,
Well,
for the backups.
and that's the thing. We don't what I do with them in ours is we don't burn, we mix the ashes with the glass. We're not the diamond people. We're lower, lower than that. We're lower priced than that.
Well, there
We
you go
don't.
with the carbon again. The diamonds. I mean,
That's a whole other.
people like relics. So I mean, when you're giving back your jewelry, it's something they keep and it's a keepsake.
Yeah.
But no one thinks, where did the body go when it was spewed out the smokestack? So 98% of the body gets spewed out the smokestack. Where did, as you say, Granny go? Oh,
Yeah.
Granny go.
Yeah.
Someone's breathing her, right? Or she's coming back to the earth. Whatever was in her teeth and her implants. When we're done, all the implants are sterile, and I donate them. They get reused. So
Okay, that's good.
so
That's
they're
good.
not getting burned. So that in a typical crematory, a lot of that implants comes out charred, and it's destroyed. With ours, any of these implants, very expensive parts can get reused. It's a big difference.
Yeah. And so what's the plan? What's the future? What's the name of, is it Fireless Cremation? Is that what you're going under?
We're
Is
going to
that
go
gonna
under
be
fireless cremation for the systems, yes.
okay?
Um,
What's the future for Fireless Cremations?
who
What's the
knows?
grand
I think
what's the
we've got
grand plan, Ed?
we've got a very competitive product, right? So there's people looking at alternatives to petrochemical cremation and burial. You got green burial. I think what we've got is a price point. We're selling these for 125,000 US. So we've got the lowest price point, and that's not done because we're not maximizing profit. What we're trying to do is have a bigger impact on reducing carbon. We talk about the carbon dioxide and all the pollutants. If I can make this competitive with a crematory, price wise, why would anyone buy another petrochemical cremation? So, anybody who owns stock in some of these crematory companies, I mean, you might want to keep an eye on this. Some of the Matthew Industries of the world. I don't know how they're going to compete. I think every funeral home should start offering this. It's typically most funeral homes don't have their own crematories.
Yeah.
And it's just because of the overhead, and plus it's become a commodity to burn a body. So you ship it out to a third party person, pay them a couple $100, and you don't have to deal with it. And then all these people who work in these crematories have to get tested for mercury every year. At least here in Colorado, they're tested. So everyone knows there's environmental issues with cremation, and even people who have crematories are looking at this as an option. So I think if once they see our process and it takes a couple hours, it's clean, they can offer a new service, a new burial that doesn't involve a cemetery and a casket. You tell me. I mean, when I look at it, I see a very rosy future for the world and for our business. With alkaline hydrolysis 2.0. I don't know how else anyone would want to go. Why would you want to be burned when you could be returned to the earth? Which is,
Yeah.
we talk about from a biblical standpoint. That's kind of what people want. Not ashes to ashes. Really, you want
I
greener
mean,
pastures.
we'd have to change that that prayer, graveside reading then to what would we be turning to? Ashes to essence and and bone, or I don't know. I love the idea. I love the rose tinted glasses look of the world, Ed, because that's I do that myself, and I do hope and pray for a better world. And I do think innovations like this in the industry are massively important, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, because for the last 10 years I have talked and met the most interesting people, and I didn't have a funeral background. I do now. Um, but I feel like there's still so much that the public don't know and want to know. I get asked such fascinating questions, as I'm sure you probably do. I mean, I know you were in some fundraising competition, and you won, I think, right?
Yeah, there was 150 companies competed, and it was a $100,000 pitch competition. I had some fun. I talked about what really happens during cremation in our process, and if you tell people the truth and it resonates with them, clearly it did in that competition. I just think people should be more transparent. I think people can deal with it. You talk about people who are grieving. When I bring people in, I don't do any dressing of any bodies for visitation. I just pull them out, even if they've been autopsied on a gurney, and tell them they're going to look dead. Their eyes are going to be sunken in a little. Their cheeks going to be in. We don't put any makeup on them. Maybe wipe the blood off, right? Um, and they look dead, and that helps with the grieving process. And I'm a psych major from Harvard, so I look at this and I watch the people's reaction compared to seeing somebody in a coffin that's been, filled with formalin, formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen. And even funeral directors don't like doing that anymore. They outsource that too because they know the person who's doing it probably is going to die of some weird cancer. I mean, obviously, funeral directors have very odd cancers that most of us don't get, or most people don't get. But anyway, the whole death and dying process is just very normal. And to take it and make it into a circus doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I could see reverent body care, where you're cleaning a body yourself. I like home funerals. When my mother died, I put her in a cooler, a freezer, because she was going to Arlington Cemetery. And it's 4 to 6 months before she could go with her husband, who was in Vietnam. And anyway, she wanted to be with him, and they didn't have alkaline hydrolysis in Maryland. So the funeral directors all wanted to embalm her because she would have been in a cooler for 4 to 6 months. And I said, no, I just bought a freezer, put it in a friend's basement, and took care of her myself. Uh, but
Wow.
people don't think outside of the box. They go in, they're grieving, even with pre-need, these big companies, which now I'm selling to, right? Like the SCIs of the world. I'd love for them to change their behavior. But there's a lot of money in embalming. There's a lot of money in selling caskets, right? There's a lot of money in selling prayer cards. You just go on, the limos, all of it's unnecessary to be returned to the earth.
It's like I keep saying on this podcast, it is a business, it is an industry, and I know people are allergic to that word because it sounds awful. But I'm like, people make money from it, so it is an industry. There's inputs, there's outputs, there's profit. It's a business, it's an industry.
You shouldn't feel like you have to do it, and people don't know there's these options. So there's various groups that try to help people work through it. And I think if someone wants to spend a lot of money on a funeral, so be it. Then you want a casket that's supposedly going to last 100 years, go for it. You want to be buried on the top of Mount Sinai, go ahead.
Like,
Pay $1 million to be next to a famous person, at Fairmont or something, right? I mean, it's just crazy.
well, just on that, actually, I mean, Michael Jackson's 24 karat gold casket that he had, like, what happens to the casket? Like, is there a casket involved in your process? What's the price for your process versus cremation for Joe Public? And do they purchase a special casket? Can they buy a regular one? Do they rent one? What's the situation with that?
We don't sell any caskets. We sell no goods or services. So when I was on sustainable funeral, before I just started on Fireless Cremation, our price list only included one option, which was the Fireless Cremation. We sold no goods or services. The body came back, the bones came back in a cotton bag tied with jute string. And the casket, we called them plaskets because they were 5-gallon plastic jugs, right? So the essence in those, and 5 gallons is a little over 40 pounds. So we ended up giving people 4 or 5 or even 6 5-gallon containers to take back with them. Um, and we don't charge for that. We ask them to return it so we can reuse them. And if they lived far away, they could recycle them. But you could actually ship a body that way from, let's say, Denver to Florida for $160. Now you tell me what it would cost to ship a body air freight from Denver to Florida. Florida it might be at least 3 grand, and then you
At
got to bring
least.
them to drop them off. You need the air freight. You pay to be picked up at the airport. This way here, we just ship your plaskets and your bones to wherever you want to be, final resting place, right? And it's
Right.
really inexpensive. So
So effectively, Granny goes onto a plate or a tray of some form and goes into your unit. How large is your unit? Will it fit in regular
the new one,
crematoriums?
yeah. So it's about 7 feet by 3 feet wide, all in. So and it'll hold a 500-pound decedent.
Okay. And one at a time.
We only do one at a time. Yeah.
Okay. So you
Some
go
of them
onto a
come in
tray.
trays. No, there's no tray. They come in on a
Oh,
gurney.
sorry.
They come in on a gurney, and then with the new one's designed with a mortuary lift. So the body goes in, it's dropped into this, basically a spa, into a tub. And then it closes the lid. And then when it's done, all the essence is pumped into what we call an essence fill station, where it sits, and that's where the crystallines form. They come out, then the plaskets get filled with the essence, and all the bones are the small sandy bones are collected in a grid collector, I'm sorry, that collects all the sandy bones. The big bones are still inside the vessel. So the funeral director would take the skull and the femur and the tibula and whatever other big bones are left in there and remove those. And then they have to dry, and then they go in a cremulator, like something that breaks the bones up.
Yeah. Okay. So you still use the cremulator to grind the bones.
Yeah, typically, like I said, anywhere from typically a third to just depends on the body. Some bodies, their bones just break apart. I don't know if they got, the collagen's gone or what, but we've had people where 4 times as much of their bigger bones is sandy bones. So we weigh the bones right now because, there's a new process we've been doing it for over a year, right? This new chemical process, but we want to, from a scientific standpoint, figure out the best way to do it. And it's just very interesting to see people's bone density have an impact on how much sandy bones on regular alkaline hydrolysis would go down the sewer. And that's a real problem. And I won't say the name, but there's people that have some of these other systems where they have to collect that sandy bone before it goes down the sewer and also get the fats out. They won't let it go down into the sanitary sewer system. It's not good for the waste treatment system.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So effectively, Granny goes into a warm bath for a couple of hours,
Uh,
right?
that's kind of a gentle way to put it. I mean, that's kind of
That's
that's
what I
kind of
do, Ed.
whitewashing it. I mean, basically, he's going into a chemical bath that's going to break down her body. So I mean, yeah, you hear people say it's a water cremation. That's bull. It's not a water cremation. You put a body in water and tell me how long it takes to break down, right? If you put no heat and stuff. So I mean, I hate the name water cremation personally, but because you really are using chemicals, and the chemicals have a purpose. One is to break down the fats, which we do. The other one is to do a dissolution of all the proteins in the body and the tissue. And then you got to use another chemical if you want to bring it down to something that's good for the earth to bring the pH down. So it's really is instead of petrochemicals, it's actually chemicals that add value to the nutrients in your body. So at the end, like I said, you're more beneficial than if you died out in exposure when you're hiking here in Colorado and scavengers got you, right?
Yeah.
You're better off having your loved ones go up and pour you out in the mountains. You're adding more nutrients back to the earth
Right.
because that's what the chemicals do. They add nutrients. And
Right.
there's not. I mean, if you're a biologist, you would, or grew stuff, a botanist, you would know how valuable the nutrients are in your body. So
So there is no So I can see the benefits of this for the funeral directors, but I can also see where they'll fight you on it because they're losing out on their casket sales and everything. And I mean, it definitely sounds like something that, as you said, somebody who's not even in the industry could purchase one of these units and in some ways go into head to head with the funeral directors because it's going to be a lot lower cost. What's the average cost or charge that a funeral director or other person would charge for this?
I would say a realistic price is going to be somewhere around 2 grand. I
Right.
know some funeral homes are charging more than double that, and
Okay.
people are paying it. You know where it's at.
But there's
Um,
no casket, there's no embalming, there's no other charges.
no, I mean you can embalm if you want.
Yeah, it's just
I don't know
pointless.
why a funeral director would want to embalm. I mean, it just makes no sense to put your own personal, self at risk.
Well, it's interesting because when you were describing, I'm personally not a fan of embalming. That's just for me. But when you were describing what you did or do for a family, I personally I'd be very against that also. As in that's just my own personal because I actually was talking quite recently on another podcast episode about how because I do what I do and I work in the business I work in, when my loved ones pass away, people assume I want to see them dead when we have wakes in Ireland and things like that. Now, they are typically embalmed. I don't. Usually, I don't want to see them because I want to remember them laughing. I want to remember them as they were. So, like what you described there, I find that, that would be offensive to me because sometimes I think people do need closure. I definitely do. And there may be somebody I lose in my life that I will need that type of closure because I just won't believe it otherwise. But I don't think everybody is prepared mentally, emotionally, spiritually for seeing something like what you're talking about. And I do think there is benefits to embalming in some respect to the embalming and the makeup and all of that for people that want to see their loved one and have a moment with them. I don't agree with embalming from a chemical point of view. It's just adding more. I mean, people talk about how Coke and Diet Coke is bad for your body. I think, well, I mean, you're going to choose embalming when you die, so you're pumping all sorts of chemicals into you then. But yeah, I've just had bad experience as well myself with people I know and care about. I've walked in and I've seen them in coffins and caskets and they just didn't look like themselves as far as I was concerned, and I wish I'd never seen them that way because now my memory of them is distorted, you know.
I don't know. I mean, I agree. It could be an individual thing, but I think seeing people look dead helps with the grieving process, and that's been my experience. Most funeral directors wouldn't do that, um, partly because I think one, you think it's more respectful to make their, plump their skin up, and you can do it with makeup. You don't have to add formalin to plump up their. Basically, you're just dealing with the face typically, right, or hands. So you can put makeup on it. You don't really need to put formalin and make someone look pink. I mean, I look plenty pink. Just put some rouge on me, right?
Yeah.
If you want to see me. But I think
I, I'm gonna hold you to that, Ed.
yeah, there you go.
On your deathbed, I'll come over and I'll rouge you up.
Yeah, the Glam Reaper rouge
Exactly.
straight on. But I would say seeing people that are dead look dead gets you past the point that, geez, you accept the fact that that person looks dead. We should be used to seeing people looking dead, not looking like they're somehow asleep in it. That's my personal opinion, but I'll never change that. So I'm not fighting
No,
that battle.
yeah, no,
I'm just telling you
absolutely.
what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. We're gonna have to end it there anyway. So if that's a
Okay,
call you need
sorry.
to take, because I got to run to another one.
Oh,
But
it was an alarm. Sorry.
oh, okay. It's time to get up now, or maybe it was just time to stop talking to Jennifer. No, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for filling us in on everything. I'm sure I'll probably need to have a follow-up episode because I have a feeling there'll be a lot of questions, whether it's industry or other, on that. We'll leave all your information below the video and below the podcast. So what do you think, guys? Would you get fireless cremation, have it done to your loved one, or would you choose it for yourself in a pre-plan? Let us know in the comments. Glam Reaper Podcast at gmail.com. That's Glam Reaper Podcast at gmail.com. We'll talk to you soon.